So many secrets are kept with lies. The cruelest ones are kept with silence, and with the people who agree, without ever saying the words out loud, never to ask the question. Gregory Lawson had lived inside one of those silences for 6 years. He simply did not know it yet. It was the week before Christmas, and the pediatric wing of St. Vincent's Children's Hospital had been transformed, for a single afternoon, into something close to a wonderland. Paper snowflakes turned slowly on invisible threads. Silver garland framed the nurses' station. Volunteers in red hats carried trays of cocoa down the corridors, and a long line of children curled through the ward, each one waiting for a wrapped gift from the hands of the man at the center of the room. Gregory handed out the presents himself. He always did. His foundation funded most of the programs on that floor, and once a year he came in person, lowered himself to the children's level, and placed each gift into small hands while the cameras flashed behind him. Beside him stood his daughter, Zoe. 6 years old, in a green plaid dress, with her late mother's deep brown skin and her late mother's quick, watchful eyes, and her father's pale crescent birthmark on the inside of her left wrist. She had come to help. Mostly she had come to watch, with open wonder, as her father became, for one afternoon, the nearest thing a billionaire can be to a man in a paper crown. A father pressed forward. Mr. Lawson, my son's next, just one picture. A small girl tugged at his coat. I want the bear, please, the brown one. The room hummed with voices and laughter, and the bright, nervous joy of children who do not often get afternoons like this. Then Zoe pulled on his sleeve. Dad. Gregory passed a wrapped box to a beaming little girl without looking down. 1 minute, sweetheart. But Dad. What? Look. She tugged harder, and something in the insistence of it made him glance down. Zoe was not whining. She was not asking for a turn, or a cookie, or any of the small things children ask for. Her face had gone still and serious, in the way a child's face goes serious only when she has seen something the grown-ups have walked right past. What is it? He asked. She pointed toward the far end of the line. That boy over there. He has a birthmark, exactly like mine. Gregory blinked. The remark was odd enough to cut straight through his concentration. Does he, now, he said, half amused. Yes. On his wrist. The very same one. He looked where she was pointing, but the crowd was thick, and he couldn't see. So he straightened, handed the rest of the gifts to a volunteer, and said, Hold these for me a moment. Then he took his daughter's hand. Show me. Zoe brightened at once and led him through the crowd toward the back of the room. There, she whispered. The gray hoodie. And Gregory saw him. A small boy, no older than 4, stood near the window beside a thin woman in a coat that had been good once, a long time ago. He was up on his toes, straining to see how close he was to the front of the line. In his excitement, he had shoved both sleeves up past his elbows. Gregory's eyes dropped to the boy's left wrist before he had decided to look. The boy felt them coming and shrank against his mother, his small shoulders pulling tight, gazing up with that wary, uncertain look children wear when a powerful stranger turns toward them for reasons they cannot guess. Zoe smiled first. She was good at that. Ha, she said, warm and easy. The boy blinked. Ha. She pointed at his arm, with the blunt honesty only a child can manage. You have a birthmark like me. Then she pushed out her own wrist, proud as could be. Look. Mine is just like yours. The boy looked down at his arm. It is. Gregory crouched slowly, to make himself smaller, less of a wall. His voice came out gentle. Hello there. Would you let me see your wrist, just for a second? The boy glanced up at his mother. And she went rigid in an instant. It's only a birthmark, she said, far too fast. Gregory held her eyes for half a beat. Then he looked back at the child, keeping his voice soft. It may well be, he said. But would you show me anyway? The little boy hesitated. Then, slowly, he raised his arm. And Gregory Lawson, kneeling on the bright tile of a children's hospital with a Santa had asked you on a volunteer somewhere behind him, felt the floor tilt under his knees. There, on the inside of the boy's wrist, lay a pale crescent-shaped birthmark. The exact twin of Zoe's. The exact twin of his own, hidden in that moment beneath the band of his watch. For one suspended second, every sound in the hospital dropped away. The music, the laughter, the shutter click of the cameras, all of it sank beneath some surface, and Gregory stared at that small curved mark as though the solid world had quietly split open along a seam he had never known was there. Because that mark was not a coincidence. That mark was Lawson blood. It was a trait that had run through his family for 4 generations. His grandfather had carried it. His father had carried it, beneath a watch much like his own. He carried it. His daughter carried it, handed down to her with her mother's smile. And 11 years ago, his younger brother had carried it too. Dad, Zoe whispered. Gregory did not answer. He stared at the child's wrist while something cold and very old unlocked inside his chest, and his mind raced, refusing what his own eyes were plainly telling him. Dad. You see it too, right? Zoe asked, quieter now. He swallowed hard. Yes, he said at last. The word came out rough and low. Zoe frowned up at him. Why do you look scared? He made himself breathe. He rose slowly, every motion measured, controlled, because only 30 years of discipline kept the shake out of his voice. What's your name, son? He asked. The boy shifted from foot to foot. Caleb. That's a strong name. Gregory nodded once. And how old are you, Caleb? 4. The boy held up 4 fingers, with great care. 4. Younger than Zoe. Gregory's eyes shifted to the woman at the boy's side. She stood stiff now, one hand on her son's shoulder with the quiet tension of a person ready to pull a child out of danger at the first wrong move. And your name? He asked. She hesitated. Then, carefully, Tanya. Tanya Brooks. He repeated it silently. Tanya Brooks. Beside them, Zoe had already crouched to hold her wrist up next to Caleb's, comparing the 2 marks with pure, uncomplicated delight. We really do. Much, she breathed. Caleb looked down at the 2 small crescents lying side by side, and gave a slow, astonished nod. We do. Gregory looked from the children, to their wrists, to the woman in the worn coat. And the warmth drained, by degrees, out of his face. Because Gregory Lawson was standing in the middle of a crowded children's hospital, a week before Christmas, looking at a little boy who wore his family's blood on his skin. And in 4 years, he had never once known the child was alive. For several seconds, Gregory did not move. The crowd swirled around him. A camera flashed off somewhere to the left. None of it touched him. Then he drew himself up to his full height, every line of his posture composed, in spite of the storm turning behind his eyes. Miss Brooks, he said evenly. Would you and your son come with me for a moment? There is a quieter room down the hall. I'd like to ask you about that birthmark. Her answer came back at once, sharp enough to make Zoe blink. No. Gregory kept his voice level. I'm not trying to frighten you. No, she said again. Caleb looked up between the 2 adults, baffled by the tension that had dropped over them out of nowhere. Zoe stepped closer to him and smiled, trying, the way children do, to mend what the grown-ups had broken. I'm Zoe, by the way, she said. The boy looked at her shyly. That's a cool name. Thank you. She beamed. Gregory's gaze never left Tanya Brooks. Miss Brooks, he said, gentler now. Please. If I'm wrong about what I think I'm seeing, then this conversation ends in 5 minutes, and you walk away, and you never have to see my face again. I let the words settle. But if I'm not wrong, then this matters far more than you can know, standing here right now. Something in his tone slipped past her guard. She studied him for a long moment, weighing him the way a woman weighs a stranger who has, in the space of a minute, become either a threat or a turning point, and cannot yet tell which. Then she gave a single, grudging nod. All right. 5 minutes. Gregory exhaled. Thank you. It led them to a small alcove at the far end of the floor, away from the cameras and the holiday noise. A row of pale chairs sat beneath tall windows looking out over the snowy Boston streets. Zoe climbed into the seat beside Caleb at once, already chattering to him as though they had been friends for years. My dad has a Christmas tree that touches the ceiling, she informed him, proudly. Caleb's eyes went round. The whole ceiling? The whole thing? No way. Gregory sat down across from Tanya. Now that the crowd was behind them, the fear in her face had nowhere left to hide. It kept his voice low and even. Tell me the truth, he said. Where did your son get that birthmark? Tanya looked down at her clasped hands. For several long seconds, she said nothing at all. Then, very quietly, from his father. Gregory's chest drew tight. His voice dropped almost to a whisper. And who was his father? She lifted her eyes to his. Stephen Lawson, she said. The name landed like a blow to the sternum. Gregory sat frozen in the pale chair. Across from him, Zoe and Caleb had fallen into a grave debate about whether candy canes counted as a real dessert, entirely unaware. When his voice finally came, it was rough. Say that again. Tanya swallowed. Caleb's father was Stephen Lawson. For one suspended moment, Gregory could not speak. He only stared at her. Then, finally, the single question underneath all the others. How do you know that name? Tanya gave a small, hollow laugh. Because I love him. Gregory leaned back slowly, as the past shifted beneath him like a floor coming loose. And now he saw it. He looked at the little boy again, truly looked, and there it was. Stephen's face, in miniature. The same wide brow. The same way of pressing his lips together when he was thinking hard. His throat closed. When? He asked, quietly. When did you know him? Tanya glanced at Caleb before she answered. 7 years ago I was working the late shift at a diner out by the edge of the city. It came in every Tuesday. Black coffee, slice of apple pie, always the same order. Left the tip too big for the bill, because he'd decided I worked too hard. A faint, broken smile touched her mouth. He told me his family had money. And that they'd cut him off. Gregory closed his eyes for a moment. That was Stephen, exactly. He said he'd picked the wrong woman, by his family's standards, Tanya went on, her voice gone soft with memory. Wrong part of town. Wrong family. Wrong everything. The smile faded. He said he didn't care about a single piece of it. Gregory's jaw tightened. Of course. Their father had always prized pedigree over anything as inconvenient as happiness. Stephen left home for you, he said. It was not quite a question. Tanya nodded. He walked away from all of it. Said it never felt like home anyway. Zoe, half listening now, looked up and frowned. Wait. Caleb's daddy had the same last name as us. Gregory looked at her. Tanya looked stricken. Dad, did you know Caleb's daddy? Zoe asked. Gregory's voice came out gentle. He was my brother, sweetheart. Zoe's eyes went wide. That means, Gregory said slowly, that Caleb might be your cousin. Zoe gasped, as though she had just been handed the greatest news of her young life. I have a cousin? Caleb stared at her, stunned. What's a cousin? It's family, Zoe explained, with enormous authority. But not a brother. It's almost better, honestly. That sounds great, Caleb decided, silently. Tanya pressed trembling fingers over her mouth. Gregory forced himself to focus. Tell me everything, he said. Please. Tanya gathered herself, eyes down. Stephen and I lived together for almost a year. We had nothing. We were happy anyway. Her voice cracked, just slightly. Then I found out I was pregnant. He cried when I told him. Actually cried, this grown man, right there in the kitchen. And then he said he wanted to come back here. He wanted to make peace with the family before the baby came. He kept saying his brother would understand. That if anyone in the whole world would, it'd be you. Gregory felt the words go in like something with an edge. He said that. All the time. Tanya's eyes were shining now. He loved you. After everything they did to him, he never once stopped. Gregory had to look away. But before he could come back, Tanya continued, very quietly, he got sick. It happened fast. Faster than anybody thought. It could. Gregory turned back sharply. Sick. She nodded, and the tears spilled now, without her leave. Very sick. By the time the doctors understood what it was, there was almost nothing they could do. Stephen died before Caleb was ever born. The words took all the air out of the small room. Because that was not the story. That was not the story Gregory's family had been told. He stared at her. That's not what I heard, he said. Tanya gave a bitter, worn-out laugh. Then somebody lied to you. And the blood in Gregory Lawson's veins turned slowly to ice. He thought of the phone call from years ago brief. Harried. The family attorneys who had handled every detail before he could form a single real question. His father, calm and final, saying there had been an accident, that it was finished, that the family did not parade its grief in public. His father. His father had buried this. Gregory's hands curled slowly into fists in his lap. Tanya watched him, careful. I never told a soul, after he died. Stephen said your family would never accept me. Never accept our son. So I believed him. He disappeared. It felt safer than hoping. You should have told me, Gregory said. But there was no anger in it. Only a hollow ache. Her eyes flashed. Why? So your rich, powerful family could come and take my child, because he carries your blood? She leaned forward, her voice trembling now. Do you have any idea what it is to raise a boy alone, while everything around you whispers that you're not enough? To choose, some months, between the rent and his medicine? To lie awake listening to him breathe, and bargain with God for one more year. The tears were running freely now. I had one thing left in this world that was mine, Mr. Lawson. One thing Stephen gave me. He was not about to gamble him away. Gregory said nothing. There was nothing to say that would not have sounded like an excuse. Beside them, Zoe took Caleb's hand with the absolute certainty of a 6-year-old who has decided how the world will be arranged from here on out. Well, she announced. If you're my cousin, you have to come see the tree that touches the ceiling. Caleb looked up at his mother. Can he? Tanya laughed, wet and cracked, through her tears. Gregory stared at the two children. At his brother's son, sitting beside his daughter. At the impossible, undeniable fact of him. His brother had died believing the family had thrown him away like something broken. A woman had raised that brother's child alone, in fear and in want, while a little boy carrying Lawson blood grew up 4 years deep without one living soul in his father's family knowing he drew breath. Gregory swallowed hard. Then he looked Tanya Brooks in the eye, and spoke with a quiet that weighed more than any vow shouted from a rooftop ever could. You have my word, he said. No one is taking him from you. Not me. Not anyone alive. Tanya searched his face for the lie she had spent 4 years expecting from men like him. Gregory lowered his voice. I failed my brother once. He will not fail his son. That night, long after Zoe had been tucked into bed and the great halls of the Lawson house had gone quiet, Gregory did not sleep. He sat alone in his study, the lamps turned low, the city glittering far beyond the glass. A glass of bourbon stood untouched at his elbow. In his hands he held a framed photograph he had not taken down from the shelf in years. Stephen grinned out of it with the easy confidence of a younger brother who still believed the world would always tilt his way. One arm thrown across Gregory's shoulders. Both of them sunburned and laughing on some forgotten dock at the end of some forgotten summer, both certain the future was theirs by right. Gregory stared at his brother's face until his vision blurred. Then he looked away. For years he had told himself a tidy story. That grief becomes manageable if you only stay busy enough. Work long enough hours. Close enough deals. Buy enough property. Sit through enough galas. Eventually the ache dulls down into something quiet and presentable, and a man lets himself call that healing. Tonight he understood it had all been a lie. Because tonight grief was no longer a memory. It had a face. A small, serious face, with watchful eyes and a pale crescent on its wrist. Stephen's son. The phrase still refused to sit straight in his mind. A soft knock came at the door. Come in. Mrs. Foster entered with a tray, fresh coffee and a plate of biscuits no one would touch. She had kept this house for nearly 30 years. One look at him, and her expression softened. You haven't moved in 2 hours, she said. Gregory set down the photograph. I'm not hungry. I wasn't asking about the biscuits. She crossed the room and set the tray on the desk. Then her eyes fell on Stephen's picture, and her voice gentled. You loved him a great deal. Gregory gave a short, jawless laugh. I spent half my life fighting with him. That isn't what I said. He leaned back, the exhaustion showing through the cracks in his composure. He was impossible. Reckless. Stubborn as a locked door. He was convinced every rule on earth had been written specifically so he could break it. Mrs. Foster smiled faintly. Reminds me of somebody. Gregory let that pass. His gaze drifted back to the photograph. He was also the only one in this family who ever said exactly what he meant. No maneuvering. No performance. No pretending to be anything. His voice dropped. He deserved far better than what we handed him. Mrs. Foster said nothing, because there was nothing in it worth arguing. Their father had run the Lawson family like a small, frozen kingdom, and kingdoms do not pardon disobedience. When Stephen refused to leave Tanya, the punishment had come down fast. His trust frozen. His cards cut off. His name quietly scrubbed from the family company and from every drawing room that mattered. Gregory had objected, in private. But not loudly. Never loudly enough. He had told himself there would be time to put it right later. There always seemed to be time. Right up to the moment there wasn't. His phone buzzed against the desk. He grabbed it instantly. Joey Caligua. Talk to me, Gregory said. Joe's voice came low and steady through the speaker. He had been Gregory's private investigator for 15 years, and he did not pad his sentences. I've got first findings. Gregory straightened. Go. Tanya Brooks is clean. No record. No drugs, no fraud, none of it. Works 2 jobs. Waits tables at night, keeps the books for a small contractor in the mornings. 1-bedroom walk up across the river. Gregory's jaw tightened. And the bow? Medical records match what she told you. Caleb's got a heart condition. Born with it. Needs ongoing care, surgery somewhere down the road. She's fallen behind on the bills for it. Gregory closed his eyes a moment. Anything else? A pause. Joey hesitated, which Joe almost never did. There's more. It's about Stephen. Gregory's eyes opened. What about him? The official story your family got. It doesn't hold up. Issa slid slowly down Gregory's spine. Explain. There's no accident report for a Stephen Lawson anywhere near the date your father's office logged. No police file. No coroner's record. No hospital intake under that cause of death. Joe paused. None of it exists, Greg. Gregory stood up slowly. What are you telling me? I'm telling you the story your family was handed was not the truth. Joey's voice stayed even, but careful. I found private hospice records. Stephen was admitted under a false name, 6 years back. Late stage leukemia. Gregory stopped breathing. Leukemia. He turned slowly toward the dark window, the city lights smearing into long gold lines. Tanya had told the truth. Stephen had not gone fast, in some clean and merciful crash. He had wasted away over months. And no one had told him. Joe's voice softened, just slightly. Greg. Gregory swallowed. Keep going. The hospice notes say a woman named Tanya Brooks stayed with him to the end. She was 7 months alone when he passed. Gregory pressed his hand flat against the desk, because all at once he could see it, far too clearly. Stephen, dying in some quiet back room under a name that was not his, while Tanya sat beside him, carrying his unborn son. No family. No brother. No one from home. Because somebody had made very sure they never knew there was anything to come home for. One more thing, Joe said. Financial records show your father's personal lawyer arranged every piece of it. Quiet burial. Sealed file. No obituary. Nothing. Gregory's face went to stone. His father. Even years in the grave, the old man still knew exactly where to put the knife. He buried the truth right along with him, Gregory said quietly. Joe didn't answer. He didn't have to. Gregory ended the call and stood motionless in the silence that came after. Mrs. Foster watched him closely. What is it? He turned, his face pale with a fury he had not felt in years. My father lied to all of us. Her brow furrowed. About what? He told us Stephen died in an accident. Savin. Panless. Gregory's voice sharpened with every word. He didn't. Stephen had leukemia. He was dying for months. My father knew, and he made certain I never found out. Mrs. Foster stared at him in disbelief. Why on earth would he do that? Gregory laughed, low and bitter. Because Stephen loved the wrong woman. Because he embarrassed the name. Because in my father's world, disobedience earned you exile. His eyes darkened. And it turns out exile didn't end when he died. The room fell silent. Gregory looked down at his brother's photograph. And for the first time in years, the grief inside him twisted into something hotter. Anger. Not at Stephen. Not at Tanya. At his father, who had done this. And at himself, who had swallowed the lie. He had accepted it because it was easy. Part of him had even wanted it to be true, that Stephen simply wanted no contact, because that hurt less than the alternative, that his brother had been left to die in the dark while pride held the door shut from the inside. He sank slowly back into the chair. He was dying, he whispered. And I never knew. Mrs. Foster's voice gentled. You couldn't have known. I should have. His voice cracked. He was my brother. He stared at the photograph with hollow eyes. All those years, I told myself he chose to stay gone. He swallowed hard. He wasn't choosing anything. He was trying to live. Trying to build something. Trying to find his way home. His voice fell to almost nothing. And I never once went looking for him. The truth of it lay between them in the dim study, heavy as a stone too large to lift. Upstairs, faint through a half-open monitor, Zoe laughed in her sleep at something only she could see. And the sound broke something loose in Gregory's chest. Because Stephen should have had that. Stephen should have had nights. He spent listening to his son laugh through a wall. He should have lived to teach Caleb to ride a bike, to throw a ball, to not a Tyrone the morning of some school dance. Instead, a little boy with loss and blood was growing up in a cramped walk-up with a fragile heart, while the family that should have stood around him like a wall never even learned his name. Gregory stood up abruptly. Mrs. Foster blinked. Where are you going? He was already reaching for his coat. To start undoing what my family did, he said. Tonight. Half an hour later, his car moved slowly across the river and into a part of the city his family would never have driven through by choice. The streetlights turned the icy roads to long ribbons of gold. Joey had sent the address ahead. The building was older than any building had a right to be while people still slept inside it. Brick gun dark with decades. Paint flaking near the stairwell. A single bulb flickering over the entrance, losing its fight with the cold. Gregory sat in the car a moment, looking up at it. His brother's son lived here. His nephew. A lost by blood, asleep beneath a roof that surely leaked, in a neighborhood his family had spent 3 generations pretending did not exist. The shame of it closed his throat. He climbed the stairs and knocked. Inside, he heard movement. A pause. Then the door opened, and Tanya's face filled with pure shock. Mr. Lawson. He stood in his dark coat, the winter wind at his back, his eyes carrying more weight than they had that afternoon. We need to talk, he said. Tanya hesitated. Then she stepped aside and let him in. The apartment was painfully small. A worn couch. A galley kitchen. A space heater ticking against the wall. In one corner, toys had been stacked with care beside a short shelf of children's books, their spines held together with tape. And on the couch, under a blanket printed with rockets, Caleb slept, one stuffed toy jammed beneath his chin. Gregory stared at him. Stephen's son. So small. So entirely unaware of the war of guilt and grief turning inside the man standing over him. Tanya shut the door softly. What happened? Gregory turned to her. And for the first time in years, his voice carried none of the boardroom polish, none of the careful corporate edges. Only the plain, raw sound of a man in pain. My father knew Stephen was dying, he said. And he kept it from me. The anger Tanya had carried for 4 years softened, just a fraction. Gregory's eyes went back to the sleeping boy. He died believing his own family had thrown him away. He did, Tanya whispered. Right to the end, he kept hoping somebody would walk through the door. Her voice broke. Nobody ever did. The words cut deeper than anything Joe had read him over the phone. Gregory swallowed hard. Then he looked at her, with a quiet certainty that had settled over him somewhere on the drive across the city. I can't change what happened to Stephen, he said, his voice rough. I would give every dollar I own if I could. But I can change what happens next. Tanya's breath caught. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so as not to wake the boy. I meant every word I said today. No one is taking him from you. His gaze flicked to Caleb. But that child is my family. My brother's son. And whether you ever trust me or not, I am not walking away from him a second time. Tanya stared at him in silence for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. Tanya Brooks did not trust easily. Gregory understood that within minutes. She offered him the one chair not buried under folded laundry, then stayed standing herself, arms crossed tight, as though sitting down might cost her ground she could not spare. He lowered himself into the chair slowly, taking in the room with the quiet attention of a man counting every detail. The place was clean, despite its age. No battles. No mess. No neglect. Only wear. The particular wear of people who survive one hard month at a time, and start the next one anyway. Tanya caught him looking. If you're trying to decide whether I'm a bad mother because I'm poor, she said coldly, don't bother. Gregory met her eyes. I'm trying to understand how you've done all of this alone. That caught her off guard. Her crossed arms loosened, just slightly. Barely, she admitted, after a moment. His gaze went back to the couch. How bad is his heart? Tanya's whole face tightened, fear and exhaustion rising together. Bad enough that I know the sound of it in my sleep. The doctors say he needs surgery. A real surgeon, a real hospital, the kind I can't get him to from where I am. Her voice hardened, to keep it from shaking. He's been on a list for 9 months. We don't move up. We just wait. Gregory was quiet a moment. Then he said, simply, he comes off the list tonight. Tanya's eyes cut to his. I don't want your charity. It isn't charity. A held her gaze. Charity is for strangers. A is my brother's son. A let it settle. There's a difference between the two, and I think you know it better than I do. She turned toward the dark window, blinking fast. You don't get to show up after 4 years and decide you're the hero of this. No, Gregory agreed. I don't. And I'm not trying to be. A leaned forward, forearms on his knees. I'm trying to be a little less of the man who let his brother die alone. His voice dropped. That's all. That's the whole of it. For a long time, neither spoke. The space heater ticked. The wind leaned on the glass. Then Tanya sat down, finally, on the edge of the couch beside her sleeping son, and rested one hand lightly on his small back, feeling for the rhythm there the way she must have done 10,000 times before. He loves anything that flies, she said quietly. Not quite a surrender. But near it. Rockets, planes, birds, doesn't matter. He's decided he's going to space one day. A faint, exhausted smile. I haven't told him you have to have a strong heart for that. Didn't they seem fair to? Gregory felt something unclench in his chest. Stephen was the same, he said. Wanted to be a pilot when we were boys. Said to jump off the boathouse roof with a bed sheet, swore up and down it slowed him down. A shook his head. Broke his arm twice proving it didn't. Ismail, startled sound escaped Tanya. Alpha laugh. Here first. Tell me about him, she said. The boy version. Calip's only ever had the stories I could give him. They want more. So Gregory did. He sat in that cramped apartment well past midnight, and he gave Tanya Brooks back the brother she had loved as a grown man, only younger, and whole, and alive. The reckless one. The funny one. The one who climbed the wrong trees and said the wrong things to exactly the right people and infuriated their cold father in a dozen inventive ways. And as he talked, the wall around Tanya did not come down. But the door opened in it. Used enough to let a little warmth pass through. When he finally rose to leave, near 1 in the morning, he paused at the door. A specialist will call you tomorrow, he said. Not a stranger off a hotline. The best pediatric heart surgeon in the region. Whatever it costs, in money or in waiting, it's handled. You will never see a bill. He met her eyes. And that part isn't a kindness. That's just the floor. The kindness, if I earn it, comes after. Tanya's voice was barely a whisper. Why? Gregory looked back at the boy on the couch, at the small crescent on his wrist just visible beneath the blanket. Because someone in this family should have walked through that door a long time ago, he said. And I'm the one who's still here to do it. What came next did not happen all at once. Trust never does. The surgery came first. Caleb was admitted to the cardiac unit at St. Vincent's in the new year, under the care of the surgeon Gregory had promised. Tanya did not leave the hospital for 3 days. And Gregory, to her quiet astonishment, was there too. Not for any camera. There were no cameras this time. He sat in the waiting room in an ordinary sweater, holding cold coffee, while somewhere beyond the doors a machine kept time over his brother's only child. When the surgeon finally came out and said the word stable, Tanya folded forward in her chair and wept into her hands. And Gregory did the only thing left worth doing. He sat down beside her, and let her, and did not try to fix it, because some things are not built to be fixed, only witnessed by someone who refuses to look away. So he visited every day after school. She brought Caleb drawings of rockets, most of them on fire in a way she insisted was intentional. She held his hand through the rail of the hospital. Bathed and informed him, with total gravity, that cousins were legally required to share their pudding cups. And slowly, week by week, the two families that had always secretly been one began to fold back into each other. There was an older woman in all of it, though. Constance Lawson. Gregory's mother. Stephen's mother. She had outlived her cold husband by several years, and she had carried her own quiet share of the silence, though hers was the silence of a woman who had suspected, and been afraid to ask, and let the fear win. When Gregory told her the truth, the whole of it, she did not defend herself. She only asked, in a voice gone thin and old, to meet the boy. The day Constance Lawson met her grandson, she lowered herself onto the floor of that small apartment in a coat worth more than a year of its rent, and she took Caleb's small hand, and turned it gently over, and looked at the crescent on his wrist. The same mark she had kissed on her own son's wrist, 40 years before. "Oh," she said. "Just that. Oh. There you are." And Caleb, who understood none of it, looked up at the crying old woman and offered her his favorite toy rocket, because rockets went up, and up seemed like the right direction for a moment like that one. She called him a wonder. He called her, a few weeks later, without thinking about it at all, Grandma. And Constance Lawson wept away only the very old weep, quietly, as if the tears had been set aside a long, long time, and saved for exactly this. The months that followed taught Gregory Lawson a lesson his entire expensive education had somehow skipped. That repair is never a single grand gesture. It is 1,000 ordinary ones, repeated, until the people on the other side finally stop bracing for the day you don't show up. I learned the route across the river by heart. I learned that Caleb would eat any vegetable on earth if you called it astronaut food, and none of them if you didn't. I learned that Tanya took her coffee black and her help in small portions, and that pushing too hard, too fast, undid a month of patience in a single afternoon. So he learned to move slowly. To arrive, and keep arriving, and ask for nothing in return. And somewhere in all of it, without either of them quite naming the day, the visits stopped being about duty, and the dinners stopped being about the boy, and the quiet between Gregory and Tanya stopped feeling like a wall and started feeling like a room they were both content to sit in. He was not a man who fell quickly. He had spent 30 years measuring a thing twice before he ever reached for it once. But he found himself, more and more, simply wanting to be wherever she was. Not to manage it. Not to fund it. Only to be there, when she left, which was rare, and which he came to feel was worth nearly any amount of waiting. What grew between them grew the way the deepest-rooted things grow. Slowly. Quietly. Out of the unlikely soul of a shared grief, and a shared boy, and a shared refusal to let pride win in this family a second time. By the following autumn, the walk up across the river stood empty. Tanya had not handed over her independence so much as finally found a place steady enough to set part of it down. She and Caleb moved into the Lawson house, into wings that had stood echoing and unused for years, and the great cold halls that Gregory's father had once ruled by silence began, for the first time anyone could remember, to fill with the sound of a child running where running was strictly not allowed. They married without spectacle. No press. No grand announcement. Only the handful of people who had become, against every odd, a real family, standing together in a room while two people who had each found their way to love the long way around finally stopped circling it. So he announced, to anyone who held still long enough, that she had personally arranged the entire event. Constance held Caleb on her lap through the quiet part and cried without shame when he leaned his whole weight back against her, the way a child leans only on the people he has decided are safe forever. And Gregory, when he made his promise, very nearly lost his composure altogether, because the vow he made aloud to Tanya was bound up with another vow he made silently, in his own chest, to a brother who should have been standing at his shoulder that day, and was not. Late that night, after the small gathering had quieted and the children had been carried up to bed in a tangle of good clothes and pure exhaustion, Gregory slipped away for a moment alone. He found himself in the upstairs hall, before a portrait of Stephen he had hung there months earlier, in the place of honor their father had spent a lifetime denying him. He looked at it a long time. "I hope we did right by them," he said softly, into the empty corridor. The silence that answered was not an empty silence. It was the other kind. The kind that finally arrives when a man sets down a weight he has carried so long he had stopped feeling it as separate from himself. He touched the frame once. And as he turned to go, he found Caleb standing barefoot behind him in the dark, half asleep, dragging a blanket. "You okay?" Gregory whispered. Caleb nodded. Then, with the quiet, devastating directness only the very young possess, he asked the question. Can I call you Dad now? Gregory went still. For a moment, every sound in the house seemed to stop at once. He crouched down slowly, to the boy's level. Only if you want to, he said. Caleb looked at him with complete, unblinking sincerity. I want to. And whatever was left of Gregory Lawson's composure, after 30 years spent building walls high enough to keep out everything, finally gave way. He pulled the boy into his arms and held him tight. Then yes, he whispered, his voice gone rough. Jace, you can. Caleb yawned against his shoulder, already drifting back toward sleep. Okay, Dad. And as Gregory carried his son back to bed through the quiet halls of a house that had once been full of nothing but ghosts, he understood something he could never have explained to the man he had been a year before. That certain prayers arrive wearing the face of heartbreak. And that some of the great turnings of a life begin with nothing larger than a child, brave enough to ask the question no one expects. Dad, why does that boy have a birthmark like mine? That spring, Gregory legally adopted Caleb. The hearing was private, by his own request. No press. No spectacle. Only family, on a row of wooden benches, in a small, sunlit courtroom. The judge, an older man with tired eyes and a soft voice, reviewed the paperwork, then looked over his glasses at the boy swinging his legs beneath the bench. Young man, he said. Do you know what adoption means? Caleb nodded, proud as anything. It means he keeps me. On purpose. Forever. The courtroom went very quiet. Tanya pressed a hand over her mouth. Constance cried openly and made no effort to stop. Even the judge blinked several times, and cleared his throat, before he could answer. Jace, he said gently. That is exactly what it means. Then he signed the order. And in the space of a single morning, Caleb Brooks became Caleb Lawson, and the name that pride had once tried to erase was carried forward into the future, on the wrist of a boy who wore his father's mark. Outside on the courthouse steps, Zoe threw her arms around him. You're officially stuck with us now, she informed him. Caleb grinned up at her. Good. The years went on, the way years do. People in the city would tell stories about Gregory Lawson, in time. They would talk about the billionaire who rebuilt the children's cardiac wing where his nephew's heart had been mended. They would talk about the scholarships he funded, in his brother's name, for kids from the neighborhoods his family had spent generations refusing to see. They would talk about the way Lawson Holdings, under his hand, slowly began to value people over polish, in ways the old man would never have permitted. They would call him generous. Visionary. Changed. But the few who truly knew him understood the real shape of it. Gregory Lawson had not become a better man because of his money. He became a better man because, on an ordinary December afternoon, a small girl in a plaid dress tugged on his sleeve in a crowded hospital, and asked him, simply, to look. On winter nights, years on, when the children were taller and the great house glowed warm against the snow, Gregory would sometimes stand at the top of the stairs, and listen. Zoe arguing cheerfully with a textbook. Caleb explaining the physics of rockets to a tutor who had stopped trying to correct him. Tanya laughing. Somewhere below, the clatter of dishes, the ordinary music of a house that was finally, fully alive. And every time, the same thought would come to him. A man can spend half his life building an empire, and still never learn what wealth actually is. Then one night, a child calls him Dad. And all at once, he understands. Because in the end, the greatest inheritance Gregory Lawson ever claimed was not his father's fortune. It was the family he had so very nearly lost, before he finally learned how to love them. And beneath the roof of a house once governed by pride, and by silence, a different kind of legacy at last took root. Not power. Not standing. Not fear. Only one plain truth, learned far too late, and yet just barely in time. That blood can make people relatives. But love is what makes them family. This story is a reminder that real family is not built by wealth, or status, or blood alone. It is built by love, by loyalty, and by the courage to choose one another, especially when it would be far easier not to. It is a reminder that pride and silence can quietly ruin the very people we were meant to protect, while truth and compassion can close wounds we had long believed would stay open forever. Sometimes the people we fail cannot be brought back. Stephen could not be brought back. But we can still honor the ones we lost, by loving the people they left behind, fiercely, and without hesitation, and without waiting for permission. Justice, in the end, is not only about dragging old wrongs into the light. It is about choosing to set them right, while there is still a little time left to do it. And the greatest legacy any of us will ever leave is not the money we gather, or the names we cut into stone. It is the love we set loose in the family we build, a love that keeps going, long after we are gone, carried forward by the people who learned, because of us, how to stay. This is a work of fiction, created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are imagined. They do not represent any real people, or any true story. This content is intended for storytelling and reflection only.